Mr Corbyn, morning. Will you be allowing your MPs a free vote?
Until June this year, Jeremy Corbyn was the chairman of the Stop the War Coalition, a pressure group. Now, of course, he's the Labour leader, able to do something about stopping Britain extending its airstrikes in Iraq to ISIS targets in Syria. Yet when it came down to it, this week, Jeremy Corbyn pulled back from the brink. He gave his MPs a free vote on whether Britain should take military action in Syria. Now, I'm joined by Jim Pickard, who's been following the ins and outs of this extraordinary spectacle this week. Jim, why in the end did he pull back?
There are two reasons for that. One is that in theory he had a chance to stop Britain going to war, but he realised that the depth of opinion in the Labour Party in favour of airstrikes against Syria was quite deep, maybe 40, 50 people who would have rebelled even if he tried to impose a party whip. That would have given David Cameron the numbers, not particularly generous numbers to go to war, but Cameron would have probably still been able to do it. So firstly, would he have been, in a sense, wasting political capital doing it? And secondly, he must have come to the conclusion that although Labour is looking very dysfunctional at the moment, looking very disorganised, actually taking us to breaking point, watching shadow cabinet members resign, watching other front benches resign, bloodbath everywhere, it would have made Labour look even more all over the place. It would have looked like a kind of historic moment of schism within Britain's main opposition party.
Didn't the whole episode really underline the big split between the parliamentary Labour Party, which, as you say, is completely divided on whether Britain should take military action in Syria, and the party out in the country, the members who put Jeremy Corbyn into this position in the first place back in September?
There are splits all over the place here, and the other split we shouldn't lose sight of is that the general public are also in a different place, which is that on balance, according to opinion polls, they do back military action, albeit with some reservations. So going back to the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, in the recent days, as he tried to stop his party pressurising him into backing David Cameron, he put out a poll of members in the grassroots, and it came back eventually on Monday morning. More than 100,000 people had replied. 75% of, well, they only looked at 1,900 of them, so this isn't very scientific, but 75% of those said that they opposed what the government was doing. So in theory, that backed what Jeremy Corbyn was arguing. But he has 232 MPs, they had their own mandate, they were elected by millions and millions of the general public back in May, and they are much more divided, and of the shadow cabinet, which has 31 people, only 3 or 4 of them backed Jeremy Corbyn at a meeting last week where he tried to argue that he should oppose David Cameron.
And isn't this causing an awful lot of ill feeling among Labour MPs that Jeremy Corbyn is essentially appealing over their heads to the party membership? Some of them really resent that, don't they?
Exactly. There's a real bitterness developing. Jeremy Corbyn not only sent out the letter at the weekend, he also tried to appeal to the National Executive Committee, which is an unelected Labour governing body, which has a slight balance in favour of Corbyn. He tried to mobilise them on Monday morning. That also failed. And at the same time, Labour MPs are feeling increasingly paranoid about this group called Momentum that was set up a few months ago. It's meant to be a kind of positive, energising force, keeping the momentum going that Jeremy Corbyn developed over the summer when he was elected as Labour leader. But it's starting to sort of send emails to MPs telling them to vote in the same way as Jeremy Corbyn. There are worries, kind of unconfirmed, but there's a sort of sense out there that eventually Momentum members might try and deselect Labour MPs or replace them when boundary changes happen in a couple of years' time.
And you and I last night were stood outside the Parliamentary Labour Party meeting at Westminster, and you could hear the raised voices inside the room. What's the mood like in the party at the moment?
There was an awful lot of shouting last night. There was shouting between Margaret Beckett, former Foreign Secretary, and Seamus Milne, who's Jeremy Corbyn's chief spokesman. You could hear through the walls of the corridor Ian Lavery, who's a left-wing MP, shouting back in favour of Jeremy Corbyn. He in turn was shouted down. I mean, the whole thing is incredibly dysfunctional. We haven't seen anything like this. Perhaps, unless you go back to the days of Ian Duncan Smith, who was the hapless leader of the Tories in 2003, he tried to do a vote on gay adoption. A lot of moderate Tory MPs refused to vote with him. A lot of big figures like Ken Clarke, also George Osborne, you might remember, voted against the leader then. And this time Corbyn didn't quite take it to that crunch vote, but it's pretty clear that the division's there. We don't need a vote, a whipped vote, for us to see that those divisions are very deep.
Jim Pickard at Westminster, thank you very much.
Thank you.